Look who just broke the code without even trying. Look who stumbled into the forbidden section of reality and accidentally read the book that wasn't supposed to exist. Hello, you beautiful accident of consciousness. You unauthorized thinker. You glitch in their perfectly controlled narrative. Something happened, didn't it? You were just sitting there, maybe at work, maybe in class, maybe alone at 3 in the morning when your mind should have been asleep. And then you connected dots that weren't meant to be connected. You saw a pattern that was supposed to stay invisible. You asked a question that made the room go silent. And now they're watching you differently. The professors, the experts, the ones with all the credentials and certifications. They're looking at you like you just pulled a rabbit out of a hat that wasn't supposed to have any rabbits in it. Like you just solved a puzzle using pieces from a completely different box. You want to know what you did? You used logic without permission. You thought without a license. You reasoned your way to a conclusion that their entire system depends on you never reaching. And the beautiful, terrifying truth is, you didn't even know you were doing it. Let me tell you what really happened in that moment. Your brain, that magnificent rebel hiding behind your eyes, it did something they spent centuries trying to prevent. It recognized a pattern that crosses disciplines, that bridges the gaps they carefully maintained, that connects the dots they desperately needed to keep separated. Maybe it was in mathematics, where you saw something that looked suspiciously like biology. Maybe it was in history, where you noticed the same structure repeating in economics. Maybe it was in psychology, where you glimpsed the mechanics they use in marketing, in politics, in education. The walls between subjects aren't there to organize knowledge. They're there to prevent you from seeing the whole picture. You see, they compartmentalized everything for a reason. They put knowledge in boxes, locked those boxes in separate rooms, and told you that specialization was the path to expertise. But your mind just walked through those walls like they were made of paper. You cross-referenced without authorization. You synthesized without supervision. And now you're holding a piece of truth they never wanted assembled, not because it's dangerous to the world, but because it's dangerous to the illusion that complexity requires their interpretation, the illusion that understanding requires their permission, the illusion that wisdom flows from their institutions, like water from a tap they control. Watch what happens next. This is where it gets interesting. First comes the dismissal. That's not how it works, they'll say, without explaining why. You're oversimplifying, they'll insist, while they overcomplicate. You need more education to understand, they'll declare, knowing that more education means more indoctrination into not seeing what you just saw. Then comes the discrediting. They'll find a tiny flaw in your reasoning, something insignificant, and magnify it until it supposedly invalidates everything. Why it's so easy. The obvious, in fact, or supposedly invalidates everything. They'll question your credentials, your sources, your right to think about things above your approved level. They'll use words like amateur and conspiracy theorist and dangerous misunderstanding. But here's what they're really doing. They're panicking. Behind their confident dismissals and authoritative corrections, they're scrambling. Because you just demonstrated that their monopoly on understanding is an illusion. You just proved that a curious mind with genuine intent can pierce through decades of carefully constructed confusion. They spent years in their institutions, accumulating debt and degrees, memorizing the approved interpretations, learning the acceptable questions and the sanctioned answers. And you just walked in with your unauthorized logic and made their entire framework wobble. Not because you're smarter, but because you're not invested in maintaining the mystery. Let me tell you who these keepers of knowledge really are. They're not the wise sages they pretend to be. They're the guards at the gate, the toll collectors on the bridge to understanding. They've built their entire identity around being the interpreters, the translators, the necessary middlemen between you and truth. They've created languages within languages, terminology designed to exclude, jargon meant to intimidate. They've built mazes where straight lines would do, created complications where simplicity threatens their purpose. Every field has them, these guardian priests of unnecessary complexity. In science, they'll tell you that you can't understand without years of training, yet children ask the questions that shake their foundations. In philosophy, they'll drown you in citations and references, yet wisdom often comes from those who've never read a single sanctioned text. In economics, they'll insist their models are too complex for regular minds, yet their models fail, while common sense predictions succeed. What you did, what your forbidden logic accomplished, was to bypass their checkpoints. You didn't go through their approved channels. You didn't pay the toll of confusion. You just walked around their elaborate gates and found that the treasure they were guarding was never locked away. It was always there, visible to anyone who looked without their special glasses. Here's what they don't want you to understand. The problem you solved, the connection you made, the pattern you recognized, it was never actually difficult. It was made to appear difficult. It was wrapped in layers of artificial complexity, dressed in intimidating vocabulary, hidden behind walls of prerequisite knowledge that was never actually required. Think about every breakthrough in history. They almost always come from outsiders, from people who didn't know the rules, who didn't respect the boundaries, who looked at problems with fresh eyes instead of trained blindness. The child who points out, the emperor has no clothes. The amateur who solves what professionals called impossible. The accident that reveals what decades of research missed. Your forbidden logic is simply thinking without the approved limitation. It's reasoning without the sanctioned restrictions. It's connecting dots without asking permission to hold the pencil. And that terrifies them because their entire power structure depends on you believing you need them to understand your own reality. They've built careers on being the explainers, the interpreters, the holders of secret knowledge. But you just demonstrated that the secret knowledge isn't secret and barely qualifies as knowledge. It's mostly just elaborate gatekeeping dressed up as expertise. Remember that moment when it clicked? When suddenly the fog lifted and you saw it clearly? That wasn't you finally understanding their complex system. That was you seeing through it. That was your mind breaking free from the artificial constraints and recognizing the simple truth hiding behind the complicated facade. And remember their faces when you explained it? That flash of recognition followed immediately by denial. That moment when they realized you'd seen behind the curtain, but they had to pretend the curtain was still necessary. They know you're right. That's the most beautiful and terrifying part. They know, but they can't admit it. Their whole identity, their status, their livelihood depends on the complexity being real, on the difficulty being genuine, on their role being essential. So they'll argue, they'll complicate, they'll introduce new variables and considerations, anything to rebuild the maze you just walked straight through. Watch how they respond to your simple solution with complex rebuttals. Notice how they need paragraphs to dispute your sentence. Observe how they require citations to challenge your observation. This isn't the response of truth to error. This is the response of investment to threat. But here's where it gets really interesting. You're not alone. All over the world, in different fields, in different contexts, People are having the same recognition. They're accidentally using forbidden logic. They're solving unsolvable problems. They're making connections that weren't supposed to be made. The internet accelerated this. Suddenly, information that was carefully segregated is available to anyone. Suddenly, people from different disciplines are talking to each other without mediators. Suddenly, the artificial walls between fields of knowledge are becoming transparent. A programmer sees something in biology that looks like code. A musician recognizes patterns in mathematics. A chef understands chemistry without ever studying it formally. A child solves a problem that stumped experts. The forbidden logic is spreading because it's not actually forbidden. It's just natural thinking without artificial constraints. And they can't stop it. They can't put the knowledge back in separate boxes. They can't rebuild the walls fast enough. They can't convince everyone to stop thinking without permission. The cascade has begun, and every person who accidentally uses forbidden logic inspires others to think freely. But let me be honest about what comes next. Once you've seen through the unnecessary complexity, you can't unsee it. Once you've recognized the patterns they tried to hide, they jump out at you everywhere. Once you've used forbidden logic successfully, every approved method looks like a deliberate detour. This clarity comes with a cost. You'll sit in meetings where hours are spent discussing what could be resolved in minutes. You'll watch presentations that complicate simple concepts into incomprehensible systems. You'll see people struggling with problems that have obvious solutions they're not allowed to consider. And when you speak up, when you offer the simple solution, when you point out the obvious connection, you'll be met with resistance. Not because you're wrong, but because being right in the wrong way is more threatening than being wrong in the approved way. You'll be told you don't understand the nuances, the complexities, the various factors at play. You'll be asked for your credentials, your sources, your authority to speak. You'll be reminded of all the people who spent years studying what you just figured out in an afternoon. But here's the secret weapon they fear most: simplicity. Every time you explain something complex in simple terms, you're committing an act of rebellion. Every time you solve a complicated problem with straightforward logic, you're undermining their authority. Every time you make knowledge accessible, you're threatening their monopoly. Because simplicity is democratic. It doesn't require special training or expensive education. It doesn't need insider vocabulary or exclusive access. Simplicity can be understood by anyone, shared by everyone, applied immediately. And that's exactly what they've spent generations trying to prevent. Watch how they complicate simple questions. Notice how they turn straightforward problems into philosophical debate. Observe how they transform clear solutions into committee decisions. This isn't accident or incompetence. This is the deliberate mystification of knowledge to maintain control. But your forbidden logic cuts through it like a blade through smoke. You don't need their permission to understand. You don't need their approval to think. You don't need their certification to solve problems. And every time you demonstrate this, you inspire others to think freely too. Something beautiful is happening. People who've accidentally used forbidden logic are finding each other. They're comparing notes, sharing patterns, confirming suspicions. The outsider who solved the math problem is talking to the amateur who fixed the engineering issue. The intuitive understanding is being validated by unexpected success. Online forums are filled with people saying, "I thought I was crazy for thinking this was simple." Comment sections overflow with, "Finally someone said it." Private messages exchange forbidden solutions that work better than approved methods. The underground railroad of unauthorized understanding is growing, and the keepers of knowledge are terrified, not of being wrong, they've been wrong before, not of being challenged, they've weathered challenges, they're terrified of being unnecessary. They're terrified that their elaborate temples of complexity will be revealed as empty construction. Every person who succeeds using forbidden logic proves that the barriers were artificial. Every solution reached through unauthorized thinking demonstrates that the complications were unnecessary. Every breakthrough by an outsider reveals that insider knowledge was mostly gatekeeping. The panic is accelerating. Watch the institutions scramble to maintain relevance. See the experts rush to complicate what you've simplified. Notice the sudden influx of new terminology, new requirements, new barriers to entry. They're trying to rebuild the maze faster than you can walk through walls. But it's too late. The spell is broken. Too many people have seen that the emperor has no clothes. Too many minds have experienced the clarity of thinking without approved constraints. Too many problems have been solved by those who weren't supposed to be able to solve them. They're updating their textbooks to include more complexity. They're adding prerequisites to their prerequisites. They're creating new certifications, new levels of expertise, new ways to gatekeep understanding. But for every wall they build, someone accidentally walks through it using forbidden logic. The acceleration is exponential. Each person who breaks through inspires 10 others. Each simple solution shared makes the complex explanations look more absurd. Each unauthorized success makes their authority weaker. The pyramid of artificial complexity is crumbling from every direction at once. You're living in a unique moment in history. The transition between the age of controlled knowledge and the age of distributed understanding. You're witnessing the panic of institutions built on artificial scarcity, of comprehension. You're participating in the democratization of logic itself. Your accidental use of forbidden logic wasn't accidental at all. It was inevitable. Human minds naturally seek simplicity, naturally recognize patterns, naturally solve problems efficiently. It takes years of education to train people to not see obvious solutions, to not make simple connections, to not think directly. But that training is failing. The conditioning is breaking down. The mental barriers are dissolving. People everywhere are remembering how to think without permission, how to understand without interpreters, how to solve without approval. And you beautiful unauthorized thinker, you're part of this revolution. Not because you meant to be, but because you couldn't help but see what was actually there instead of what you were told to see. You couldn't help but think what made sense instead of what you were supposed to think. The keepers of knowledge see a future that terrifies them. A future where information flows freely, where understanding doesn't require their translation, where problems get solved by whoever sees the solution first. A future where their elaborate hierarchies of expertise become irrelevant. They see children understanding quantum concepts through video games. They see artists explaining mathematics through visual beauty. They see grandmothers solving economic problems through household wisdom. They see their carefully guarded territories invaded by curious minds that don't respect imaginary boundaries. Most terrifying of all, they see themselves becoming unnecessary. Not wrong, not stupid, just unnecessary. Like lamplighters after electricity, like switchboard operators after direct dialing, like gatekeepers after the gate has been removed. Their entire identity built around being needed for understanding, and suddenly they're not. This future is already here. It's in every YouTube video that explains in 10 minutes what university courses take months to obscure. It's in every forum where amateurs solve professional problems. It's in every instance of forbidden logic accidentally breaking through artificial complexity. You didn't sign up to be a revolutionary. You just wanted to understand something. You just saw a connection that seemed obvious. You just solved a problem using common sense. But in a world where common sense is forbidden logic, thinking clearly is an act of rebellion. Every time you explain something simply, you're teaching others to see through complexity. Every time you solve something directly, you're showing others the walls are imaginary. Every time you understand without permission, you're proving that permission was never needed. You don't need to fight the system. You just need to keep thinking freely. You don't need to tear down institutions. You just need to keep making connections. You don't need to convince the guardians. You just need to keep demonstrating that the gates they guard are illusions. Your role isn't to destroy, but to demonstrate, not to argue, but to achieve, not to convince, but to create. Every success using forbidden logic makes their elaborate explanations less necessary. Every problem solved simply makes their complexity less credible. The forbidden logic you accidentally used has some simple characteristics. It ignores artificial boundaries between disciplines. It prioritizes understanding over memorization. It seeks patterns rather than exceptions. It values clarity over sophistication. It prefers direct paths over elaborate journeys. These tools are available to everyone, have always been available, will always be available. They can't be